This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
Fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. I'll tell you about the dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over. Seeing creatures flopping around like fish in water too shallow, so hostile to one another. Seeing this, I became afraid. The world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions. I long to find myself a place unscathed, but I could not see it. Seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. But then I discerned here a thorn, hard to see, lodged deep in the heart. It's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs around in all directions, so that if that thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. So this is the first half of the Attadanda Sutta, which is from the Sutta Nipata, one of the earliest collections of Buddhist suttas. It's often in verse. And in this passage, it seems that it's the Buddha, and he's reflecting on a time when he wasn't enlightened, when he was looking around at the world in a state of dismay. And when I read this, I was just really shocked. I was sort of struck by the power and the vulnerability of the Buddha to Be's words. He talks of that dreadful fear that caused me to shake all over. He talks of being distraught, how people fight, he says, how they flop around like fish in water too shallow. He talks of longing to find a place unscathed. He talks of not being able to find it, as if there's no safe or stable place to stand upon. And then he says, he discerns a thorn. It's lodged deep in his heart. And he senses that thorn isn't just in his heart, it's in the heart of all beings, all humans. And it's that thorn that causes him to run around in all directions. And that when that thorn is removed, he doesn't need to run around anymore. He can settle down. So I've read that quote a few times preparing this talk, but even as I read it now, I feel kind of emotionally wobbly, and I feel a shiver down my spine as I read that. There's something about that. It's so desperate in a way. It's so emotional. It's so down to earth. It's so visceral. It's from the body. It's not all philosophical or abstract. It's from the belly. It feels like a howl to me. And I can really relate to that feeling of running around in all directions, trying to find some peace, trying to settle down, but unable to do that because of this thorn. And I'm still in the process of trying to uproot that thorn. Sometimes I feel like I'm getting a little purchase on it, and then sometimes I feel like I've got no idea where it is. And the latter half of the sutta, which I've not read today, suggests the kind of mind one might need to uproot that thorn. We'll get there, but not quite yet. So there's other reasons why Siddhartha, there's other Buddhist suttas where it talks around the reason why Siddhartha might. So Siddhartha was the person who became the Buddha, for those that don't know or don't remember. So there's other stories, other suttas that talk about why Siddhartha set off on his quest towards enlightenment. The Pabbaja Sutta is another such place, also from the Sutta Nipata. And I'll just read those opening stanzas from that. I will describe the going forth, how he, the one with vision, went forth, how he reasoned and chose the going forth. And this is the Buddha to be speaking. Household life is crowded, a realm of dust, while going forth is the open air. Seeing this, he went forth. So in this sutta, we get the sense that the Buddha to be, the reason why he went forth was a feeling of confinement. And like the Atthadanda Sutta, it just feels so down to earth, at least to me. That feeling of feeling confined, of being held in place by loads of responsibilities, by pressures, and that desire for the open air. Yeah, I really long for that too. So, yeah, why have I started this talk by reading these two suttas? Well, I'm going to be talking about the move from dukkha, which sometimes translated as suffering, to shraddha, which is sometimes translated as faith or confidence or trust. And I want to start with these two suttas because they do feel so relatable to me. And in a way, it suggests a move, a trajectory that every person that practices Buddhism has to go on. And it feels really significant to me that Siddhartha's journey to awakening didn't start with a euphoric experience. It didn't start with a miracle or an intervention from God or a prophecy. It started with a person feeling fearful, of suffering, of feeling distraught and desperate, of feeling confined. And particularly in the first quote I read from the Atthadanda Sutta, we also see Siddhartha witnessing other people and how they behave. He says, seeing people locked in conflict, I became completely distraught. And in some ways, the most startling part of that first sutta I read was the opening line, I thought. Fear comes from arming oneself. That feels really counterintuitive to me. I don't know whether it does to you. It feels natural to want to defend yourself if you feel fear. But what Siddhartha's saying is the complete opposite of that, that actually arming oneself increases the fear. Do we really feel more safe when we lash out at our critics and adversaries? I think our culture certainly assumes so, but the Buddha is offering a different perspective based on his own spiritual experience. I'm also remembering another sutta which says something similar, those opening lines from the Dhammapada, where it says, not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. And I want to come back to that idea a little bit later in the talk. So if you've done any of the introductory courses at the Buddhist Centre, you'll probably recognise that Siddhartha's journey is Siddhartha's process and decision to go forth towards awakening is told in a slightly different way. It's told through the story of the four sights. And the story, as we're told it, this kind of myth, is that the Buddha to be was a prince. He lived in this mansion, this big castle. He was protected from the many ills of life. And one day he goes out in his chariot, out into the world, and he sees an old man and he thinks, I too am going to get old. He sees a person suffering with a serious disease and he thinks, I too am going to get ill. He sees a corpse being carried, probably on some kind of stretcher, probably uncovered. The body is likely to be uncovered because that's the tradition in India. I think if you go to Varanasi, you'll still see that. And he thinks, I'm going to die. Although I'm well right now, I'm not old, I'm not sick, I'm not dead. All those things are going to happen to me. And even though he's in the prime of his life in many ways, it's like he really took those to heart. And in a way, I mean, sometimes it's suggested that Siddhartha, this was the first time he'd seen an old person, a sick person, a dead person. Personally, don't find that very convincing. I think it's more like he really saw them. He'd seen them before, but for some reason on this occasion, he really saw the old person. He really saw the sick person. He really saw the dead person. And he thought no one can escape that. No one can escape old age, sickness and death. They're things that happen to you even though you don't want them to. And then he wonders, it's like he goes deeply into that experience and he wonders, how do you live in the context of those three truths? What meaning does life have in the context of those three things? And the story goes that he starts to think about those questions deeply. And then he sees another sight. He sees a fourth sight. He sees the sight of a holy person If you go to India, you'll see holy people wandering the streets. And in the same way as the other three sites, he'd probably seen a holy person before, but it was a bit like he really saw them this time. While he'd been contemplating these other three truths, he saw this holy person, he thought, this person looked peaceful, and he thought, maybe this person has some answers. Maybe they have some answers to these deep questions that I've got. Now, it's interesting, you probably maybe don't know this. I didn't know this, but actually this story of the four sites, the Buddha actually never tells this story about himself. He doesn't relay it as a story of his going forth. He actually relays it as a story of a previous Buddha. That was the trajectory that they went through. But he also says that trajectory, in a way, the myth of that is what every Buddha to be has to go through. So it's sort of depicted as a universal human experience for those people that end up becoming Buddhas. And in a way, the first three sites are the crystallization of dukkha. They're things we can't do anything about. All our efforts to make life go the way we want it to, for it to fall in line with our desires, are brought up short when we contemplate old age, sickness and death. But it's the fourth site, the site of the holy person, that represents something a bit different. The holy person is a symbol of Shraddha, of faith. The holy person represents the possibility of a life beyond dukkha. So I think, whatever the historical accuracy of the story of the four sites, I think it says something archetypal about the reason why people practice Buddhism. And it says something archetypal about the way in which suffering leads into faith. So you may be thinking that, well, there's clearly a lot of dukkha in the world, and I don't see Buddhism sprouting up everywhere. So there's something else going on, isn't there? Clearly not everyone who suffers dukkha is choosing to become a Buddhist. So what else is going on? What we get, I think, in each of those three stories that I told you is a process where the Buddha to be has this experience of dukkha, and he really feels it. He looks deeply at his own experience. He looks deeply at the experience of other people. These probably wasn't the language that was used in ancient India, but to me it sounds like a person having an existential crisis. That's what it sounds like to me. He feels distress. He feels distraught. He trembles and wonders what to do. And the etymology of this word, so dukkha, we're using this word dukkha, which we've sometimes translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. It actually comes from the word for an ill-fitting wheel. So you could imagine you're in a cart, you're going down the road, one of the wheels doesn't quite fit and it's just bumpy. And you imagine it'd be okay for a bit, but after a while it would just become unbearable. So this word dukkha comes from an ill-fitting wheel. I think that really describes the kind of things Vashankar was making reference to. I also didn't get anywhere near enough sleep. So from the source, I really get the impression that that Siddhartha really goes deeply into this experience of dukkha. And then he begins searching for a way out. He begins searching for something different, for something higher. And it's only then that he notices this thorn in his heart. It's like he has to look, and then he goes, oh, there's this thorn in my heart. And then he says, it's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs around in all directions, so that if this thorn is taken out, one does not run and settles down. And likewise in the story of the four sites, Siddhartha pays attention to the old person, he pays attention to the sick person, he pays attention to the dead person. He really looks at them, he really sees them. He doesn't turn away. He contemplates it and thinks, this will happen to me too. So I'm really interested in what is happening for him in that moment. What is the decisive step that causes him to embark on this spiritual path? It would have been so easy for him to go back to his palace, to close the door, have something nice to eat, try and forget about that experience, try and pretend he hadn't had it. And I think what was happening in this experience is the Buddha to me was really abiding with, even turning towards his dukkha. And I think this is really important. I think being able to abide with our dukkha and even turn towards it is really important if we want faith to arise. So I think it's important when we have dukkha to really ask the question, what is my dukkha teaching me? What has my dukkha got to teach me about the nature of my life, the nature of existence? When we have suffering, we need to really think carefully about what the cause is of that suffering. So for many of us, our lives are not endless suffering. They're not endless pleasure either. There's pleasure, there's suffering, there's other experiences that are more neutral. And our reactions to them are usually pretty automatic. So we want to grasp the pleasant, escape from the unpleasant. That's the sort of instinctive response that we go through. And we sort of do that. I think that's probably what I do quite a lot of the time. But even though we're doing that, we're trying to grasp the pleasant, push away the unpleasant. There's a little niggling voice there that says, yes, but things aren't 100% right. So perhaps we don't have the big revelation that Siddhartha had. But it feels like things are never 100% right. There's always something that goes a bit wrong. Nothing quite lives up to our expectations. And this is what is meant by dukkha or unsatisfactoriness. And once we become sufficiently aware of that, we start becoming dissatisfied. I think that's probably what happens. And maybe we try all kinds of things to make that better. Maybe we try and find that feeling of satisfaction through our work, or through pleasure, or through comfort, or through luxury, or through learning. But in the end, they don't ever completely get away that feeling of things are not quite right. And it's not that we're experiencing pain all the time. It's not that things are awful. But we definitely do run around in all directions. I do. And over time, we end up with a feeling of sort of inner emptiness, feeling like we don't belong anywhere, feeling that things are never quite right. So what do we do about dukkha? And I think on some level, maybe I should just speak for myself, for me, I take the view, consciously or unconsciously, that happiness is when I get all my desires met, and suffering is basically the opposite of that. But the Buddha came to a pretty different conclusion. He found that whatever we enjoy, it can't last. So our suffering can't be avoided by getting our desires satisfied. So that first solution is not really a solution. It doesn't work. And I think many of us who end up practicing Buddhism, sooner or later start to get an inkling of that. And maybe we spend a while, I think I'm still doing this, trying to ignore it. We're trying to convince ourselves that we must be happy because we've got all the things that you need to be happy. But for some of us, I think there is that whisper deep in our heart that sort of says, this is okay, but you're not really happy. And maybe we've put our fingers in our ears to sort of drown out the sorrows, trying to smother that nagging feeling, but it's there underneath, it's building up, and actually trying to push it down makes it worse. The problem is, I think, is that if we're experiencing dukkha, we often feel like we're failing. I think that's how it often feels. If you feel like I'm suffering, that's because if I was better, whatever better means, I wouldn't be suffering. So it can often feel like you're failing if you're experiencing dukkha, and there's many things in the culture that I think support that, which I don't have time to go into. I definitely think the culture sustains the view that a good life is about getting all your desires satisfied. So I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that dukkha isn't the problem. And in a way, we might want to think about cherishing our dissatisfaction. because it's that makes us go in search of something higher, something more satisfying, some greater happiness. And I asked the question earlier, what is our dukkha trying to teach us? And I think that's really important because there's something specific about the way we all individually experience dukkha. So are you someone that feels hatred a lot? Do you see other people's success and sort of resent it a bit? The writer Gore Vidal once said that every time a friend succeeds, I die a little. Is that you? Are you someone that feels anxiety about the future all the time? Or do you look back and feel bitter a lot of the time? I often think that life can be brilliant in a whole variety of ways and can be rubbish in a whole variety of ways too. Whatever form your dukkha takes, it may lead you to begin a search for some answer to your problems. And of course, we don't really know what we're looking for. So we know we've got dukkha and we're looking for something different. But we may just be grasping around for various things, wondering what's going to help. And eventually, if we're lucky, a bit like Siddhartha, we come into contact with something which, for want of a better word, we might describe as spiritual. And that is Shraddha. So we often translate Shraddha as faith, but it isn't faith in the sense of believing something that you can't rationally demonstrate. So Shraddha can also be translated as confidence or trust, as I've already said. And in a way, it refers to the whole emotional side of the spiritual life. And the word comes from, the translation means something like to place the heart upon. And actually in those first glimmers of faith, it might be hard to say what you're placing your heart upon. It might be you come into contact with Buddhism and you think, oh, it's simple. I place my heart on the 3 jewels. And it's very definite. But it might be something less clear than that. It might just be the possibility of a life free of that very specific kind of dukkha that you experience. So, so a little confessional from me. I can feel very jealous of other people, and I can compare myself to other people in ways that are unfavourable to me. I diminish myself in relation to them. So I had the strong faith response when I encountered the possibility, and actually people that were trying to get out of that game completely, of that whole waste of time of comparison. And I had a very strong faith response to that, because that's, my dukkha manifests in many ways, but that is definitely one of the ways it manifests. So I had a strong faith response to that. I also had a really strong faith response when I first started meditating, and I saw in a very small, brief way, that it was my mind that made the biggest difference to whether I was happy or not some external criterion of success. So we may get a glimpse of something higher, something even transcendental. And I suppose I want to say it might not even be Buddhist at all. I think you can have a faith response to something that isn't Buddhist. So maybe you're reading a book and something in that book really speaks to you about the nature of your experience. That's Shraddha. It could be a picture, a person. It could be when you're in a vast landscape, you're in the hills, and you have a sense of something bigger than you. That I would say is a glimpse of faith, an experience of faith. And when we come into contact with that thing, something in your heart just responds. It can just feel like there's something here. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but there's something here that's really important. And it might even be the idea that there's something here. Here's the thing I've been looking for. So in my own spiritual life, I often feel like I'm following a thread. I don't really know what's on the other end of the thread, to be honest. I'm definitely not enlightened. But it's like, I know when I'm in contact with a thread. I know when I've got it loosely or when I've got it more tightly. And I'm just following that thread. And that's how, for me, how the faith response manifests in my life. Sangharakshita, who founded Triratna, he has some really nice aphorisms about faith. And he says, faith is the response, even the emotional response, of what is ultimate in us to what is ultimate in the universe. But this kind of faith is not something we need to acquire. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. It's inherent in us. Whenever we feel moved by, for example, I was in a situation the other day and somebody spoke the truth in a room where no one was speaking the truth, and I just had a faith response of like, there is something in that. That is faith. Or when we're moved by something beautiful that speaks to us of a deeper or higher truth, whatever spatial metaphor works for you, that's an experience of faith. So we all have the ability to connect with these deeper truths. Another nice aphorism from Sangharakshita is, faith is innate, doubt is acquired. You could say that faith is natural. And we can see that in the story of the four sights, I think, that faith is natural. That it's the fourth sight of the holy person that inspires faith in Siddhartha. It's the first three sights of old age, sickness, death. If they're the symbolic of dukkha, then it's the fourth sight of the holy person that's really symbolic of faith. And having that experience of seeing the holy person and thinking, maybe they know something about ending dukkha. That was the experience that set the Buddha to be out on his quest towards an awakening. I wanted to just really make that point because that suggests something else. It means that faith isn't just a nice feeling, a kind of like nice sentiment. It was the thing that set him out on his journey towards awakening. So it's the thing that potentially can shape and change your life. And often you'll hear that from people. People will say that they've had some big experience in their life, and if they're able to hold on to that, they'll say, I really made a change when X happened or when Y happened. So, of course, dukkha is really important. It's often the reason why people come to Buddhism. People often come to Buddhism because they want to escape dukkha, they want to transcend dukkha. But there's something about that experience of faith that goes beyond just alleviating suffering, at least for me. So for me, an experience of faith hints towards the possibility of a life more lived in line with the truth of things, how things really are. So for me, faith is about the possibility of a life that is wider and deeper, to a perspective on life that's wider and deeper. And I actually care more about that than I care about alleviating suffering. So it might be that dukkha is what sets you out on the spiritual path. But I think faith points to something that goes beyond just alleviating suffering. So hopefully I've given you some sense of how dukkha depends, how Shraddha depends on dukkha, how they're intertwined. And we might think that the spiritual life is about a journey of ever deepening faith. So you might be able to look at your own life and say, I've got more faith in Buddhism than I did last year, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago. But for me, I think of faith as something I've got to practice moment by moment. So I can be in a situation, for example, where I'm experiencing some anxiety or some stress. Some can be happening that I don't want. And I can feel that resistance in my being. I can feel that there's this thing happening. I really don't want it to happen. And there's the resistance. So whenever I'm able to practice mindfulness, to abide with my experience, with as much kindness as I can muster, and not look for some distraction or turn away from it. If I can accept what is happening in this moment and turn towards it with kindness, with patience, well, for me, that is an act of faith. At that moment, I'm entrusting myself to the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha said that mindfulness was a good idea. So in that moment, I'm entrusting that he had something to say, and it's worth actually giving that a go in this moment. So for me, faith isn't something I've either got or not got. It can be changeable. So sometimes when my partner annoys me, I can be kind and patient and forgiving. And sometimes, well, I do something different. Maybe I throw a few choice words out instead. And I'm also remembering Siddhartha. It wasn't clear for Siddhartha either. You might remember from the story that he'd been practicing for ages. He'd been to see all these spiritual teachers. He'd made tons of progress in the spiritual life. He'd surpassed all the people that he'd been around. He'd surpassed all the teachers that he'd sat at the feet of. And he had a moment where he thought, well, that's great, but I am not awakened. And he wondered what to do. So he had a moment of doubt. He had a moment of dukkha. And then he remembered that experience of being a boy, of being sat under the rose apple tree, of feeling a kind of spontaneous joy. And he thought, well, maybe that is the way forward. Maybe that is the way to awakening. So in that little moment, he had doubt and he remembered something that was helpful, and faith came back again. So even somebody who, wow, I mean, it sounds from the story that he's really far along the path, even somebody like that can experience doubt. So Vashankar made reference to this, but I do psychotherapy work, and I'm really drawn to working with people who are really in the grip of old age, sickness and death. So they're often people that are a bit older, perhaps their bodies and minds don't work the way they used to, or they're widowed, or some of them are facing their own death. And I feel drawn to working with these people because they're in a place where they have to work with their own minds and their hearts. They've got no other choice but to do that. And what I've noticed, having worked with quite a lot of clients like this, is that they're often pretty ashamed of themselves. And they feel ashamed because they're not able to do all the things that they feel like they should be able to do. Or their lives have not turned out as they wish their lives had turned out. Or they think they're not good enough. They have an idea about how they should be, how the world should be, and it's not that way. And of course, there's a reality to being in pain, to suffering, to dying. I am not making light of any of those things. To feeling lonely, it is horrible. But what I notice with quite a lot of these people is there's another level of suffering for them that comes in between. It becomes from the distance between how they feel their life should be and how it actually is. So it's the aversion to the suffering they feel that makes it so much worse for them. And that can so easily turn into a kind of bitterness, regret, blame. Now, yeah, I want to make the point, I'm not glorifying suffering. I'm not saying suffering is good for you. I'm definitely not saying that. But I think if we can abide with, turn towards our suffering in a curious, kind, compassionate way, and get support from others to do that, I think it's possible to see something beyond that suffering you experience. It's a bit like your heart releases as the aversion subsides. Something like that. And there's a Buddhist sutta called the Salata Sutta, which is often translated as the Sutra of the Two Darts. And the Buddha in this sutta contrasts the experience of those that have been trained in Buddhism, trained in the Dharma, to those that haven't. He suggests that a person who's been trained in Buddhism still experiences pain. They still get all the stuff they don't want to get. But they don't add to it with all the mental proliferation. And I just want to quote a bit from that sutta. And this is the Buddha speaking. Now, the well-instructed disciple of the Noble Ones, when touched with a feeling of pain, does not sorrow, grieve, or lament, does not beat his breast or become distraught. So he feels one pain, physical but not mental, just as if they were to shoot a man with an arrow and right afterward did not shoot him with another one, so that he would feel the pain of only one arrow. In the same way, when touched with a feeling of pain, the well-instructed disciple of the Noble Ones does not sorrow, grieve, or lament, does not beat his breast or become distraught. He feels one pain, physical but not mental. And another sutta, the Chaitanya Sutta, again, early Buddhist sutta, the Buddha talks about the Buddhist path being natural. And what he meant by that, I think, was when we're mindful, when we're ethical, when we practice the Dharma in some way in this moment, the next step towards awakening flows naturally. So what I take this to mean is that we can't get rid of dukkha by trying to get rid of dukkha. We can't get rid of dukkha through a force of our will. That's, I think, what he actually, I think he says that explicitly in the sutta, that willpower in that way, in the pushing and pulling way, doesn't work. So, just coming to the end now. So I think what I've been trying to say in this talk is something pretty simple. Although I feel like I've got an ever deepening sense of the magnitude of what it is that I'm trying to do. And I think what I'm saying is the simple message I'm trying to communicate is, if you're living a human life, you're going to encounter suffering. If you're lucky, you'll also get joy, happiness, friendship, meaning, all the other things we want. The fundamental spiritual question is, what do we do with our experience? Particularly our dukkha. What are we doing with it? It's coming, it's here. What do we do with it? Can we live in accordance with impermanence and insubstantiality? Or will we resist it? Try and solve it with some technique that doesn't really work? And like many of my therapy clients, at some point you'll encounter an experience, a situation that you can't change through money, through power, through pushing it away. When I was lying in bed last night at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I thought, well, this is it. I knew I was going to be speaking to you all today. This is the situation. I'm in bed, it's 2 a.m, I can't sleep. The question is, what do I do about that? And remembering that open line from the Atthadanda Sutta, fear comes from arming oneself. And that line from the Dhammapada, hatreds are never pacified by hatred, they are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. So the Dharma, I think, is ultimately asking us to abide with, and maybe even turn towards, all things, all experiences, with kindness, compassion, with patience. And it's in these moments that Shraddha isn't just an idea, but it's a living, breathing force that has the power to shape and mould your life. So I'd like to leave you with a poem from one of my great spiritual heroes, the great working class poet, painter, mystic William Blake. And this is his poem, Eternity, which I think communicates what I've been trying to communicate. He who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. But he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.